Have you ever had a moment that made your skin crawl? A shadow where there shouldn't be one? A whisper in an empty room, or something you simply can't explain? If so, we want to hear from you. Here at the Haunted UK podcast, we're always on the lookout for spine-tingling stories to feature in our end-of-season listener episodes and our short haunt series. Whether it's a chilling encounter, a mysterious experience, or something that's haunted you for years, we want your tale. Send your story to contact us at hauntedukpodcast.com. And don't forget to follow us on social media. Facebook, X at hauntedukpod, TikTok and Instagram at hauntedukpodcast, or visit our website www.hauntedukpodcast.com. Now, if you love what we do and want even more haunted goodies, then you can support the show on Patreon and Ko-fi. We've got 2 brilliant tiers, Possessed and Spooked, both packed with bonus content, exclusive episodes, and extra material that'll keep you up all night. But that's not all. We've launched a brand new sister podcast, Haunted UK Fiction, and we're calling all storytellers. Whether you're a published author, an aspiring writer, or someone with a natural gift for spinning eerie tales, we're looking for original fictional short stories and novellas with strong paranormal or supernatural themes. Think suspenseful, mysterious, atmospheric, terrifying, thought-provoking, even darkly magical. If your story is selected, we'll professionally narrate, record, mix and master it into an audiobook-style format, then feature it on the show. You'll get a copy of the finished production to use however you like, and you'll retain full ownership of your work. Submit your story to hauntedukfiction@hotmail.com and follow us on Instagram at hauntedukfiction. So whether it's truth or fiction, if it's haunted, we want it. Now, sit back and enjoy the episode. Most of these events occurred in my bedroom at night, but increasingly I had minor experiences out and about in daytime, such as faint crawling and shuffling sensations on my head and face. I tried on all the normal explanations: creaking old house, wind, sleep paralysis, hypnagogia, but none of them were a fit for most of what I experienced. I was left to conclude that I had a poltergeist. Believing that ghosts or unwanted spirits were the cause of the problem, and watching ghost-related media made me afraid, and that fear made it much, much worse. This is episode 70, part 2 of our end-of-season listener stories, and it's time to hear more from you listeners once again, but also about the ghost within. Well, our first episode of Listener Stories went down an absolute storm, as usual. These types of episodes have always been favourites for many of you out there, whether it's because you like hearing about the various types of phenomena experienced by so many, or because it helps you relate to something that you've experienced yourself. Compilations such as these seem to strike a chord. So you'll all be pleased to know that this second helping of intriguing and scary tales will be more than enough to satisfy your need for a paranormal or supernatural fix. We're going to start this episode off with a bang by hearing from a listener called Alana, who had a couple of incredibly frightening experiences with the spirit of a young boy while she was on her work experience. Hello, I hope this email finds you well. Before I start, I'd like to say how much this podcast has helped me with my spooky experiences, as the majority of my friends are skeptics and non-believers. All of your efforts at the Haunted UK podcast are amazing, so please keep up the good work. I've had a lot of experiences throughout my life so far, starting when I was young, but there is one in particular that haunts me to this day. When I was 15, I started work experience at a care home. My mum had previously worked there, and my great-grandmother was a resident there, so I spent a lot of time there growing up. It was the perfect place for me to gain my work experience. My mum used to tell me about how all the residents, including my great-grandmother, complained about a little boy being a nuisance. They would point to him and talk to him as if he were there. On my first day of work experience, I was organising the tea trolley while the other carers were waking up the residents upstairs. This left me alone downstairs. As I busied myself with the tea trolley, I heard a boy's voice whisper in my ear. It said, "Get out. You don't belong here." I jumped out of my skin and spilled tea everywhere. In a state of complete panic, I ran to the manager and apologised for the mess. But it was really because I was absolutely terrified. As the day went on, I tried telling myself that it was just my imagination, and things like that are only really heard in horror movies. Around a week into my work experience, I was working a 4 p.m. to 8:30 p.m. shift, which meant all visiting hours were over and there were less staff on duty. It was around 6:30 p.m. and all the residents were settled in the lounge room downstairs, so I nipped to the staff toilets on the 3rd floor. As I was washing my hands, I looked up into the sink mirror and saw a little boy stood behind me with fully white eyes. I was in shock and stood there in terror before screaming and running back downstairs. As I was sprinting past the 2nd floor, I heard what I thought was one of the residents crying, but no residents were meant to be on the 2nd floor, so even though I was trembling with fear, I had to go and check if anybody needed my assistance. I followed the sobs and got to a resident's room right at the back of the hallway. As I entered the room, the sobbing stopped, but then the door slammed behind me. Still in a state of terror, I screamed once again, desperately pulling on the door handle trying to get out, but the door wouldn't budge. I shouted, "Please stop. I promise I'll leave and never come back. Just let me out." And just like that, the door opened. Once I'd managed to make it back downstairs, one of the carers saw me crying hysterically and took me to the manager's office. Both the manager and carers sat me down with a glass of water. After I calmed down, I told them what had happened, expecting them to not believe me, but instead, they both stared at each other for a moment and said, "Timmy." I was so confused, but then the manager told me about a little boy who haunts the grounds. He said that he was a friendly spirit, but doesn't like new workers and residents. I must say I was taken aback and immediately asked about his identity. The manager said before the building was a care home, it was an orphanage, and it was believed that a little boy fell from a 3rd floor window. That little boy's name was Timmy. Because of the state I was still in, they let me go home early, and I kept my promise to Timmy by never going back to the care home. When I told my mum what had happened, she said she was going to tell me about Timmy, but decided against it as she didn't want to scare me. She said she'd had her own experiences with him when she first started at the care home when she was 17. Let me know if you'd like to hear my mum's experiences too. Just writing this has sent pure shivers down my spine. It's like reliving the experiences all over again. Thank you for an amazing podcast. Kind regards, Alana. Our next selection of stories come from a listener who had previously sent in submissions which were part of our Listener Stories episodes back in Season 5. As was the case back then, this listener wishes to remain anonymous. Hi Steve. The first story I want to share is one that's always stayed with me. It's about my grandfather, a man who collects clocks. He's gathered them for years, but there's one clock in particular that means more to him than any of the others. The one his father gave to him. My great-grandmother passed away sometime in the 1990s. I never knew the exact year, but she died at precisely 4 o'clock in the morning, and ever since that night, something strange has happened. The clock my great-grandfather gave to my grandfather stops every single night at exactly 4 a.m. I didn't believe it when I first heard the story. It sounded like one of those family myths that gets passed down and embellished over time. But one night, when my sister and I were staying at my grandfather's house, he woke us up just before 4. He wanted to show us for ourselves. He'd wound the clock only the day before, so there was no reason it shouldn't keep perfect time. We stood there half asleep, watching the clock tick closer to the hour. And then, right on cue, the second hand froze. 4 o'clock, exactly. The next night, it happened again. To this day, we can't explain it. My grandfather still keeps that clock, still winds it, still checks it every morning. And every night, without fail, it stops at 4. Being a very curious person by nature, I sometimes wonder if it's just coincidence. Or could that clock somehow still be connected to my great-grandfather? Unfortunately, my great-grandfather was not a good person. He was very abusive to my grandfather. However, he's told me of a few incidents that happened after my great-grandfather's death. For example, on one occasion, he was driving down a country road when he was up north. He was travelling at a rapid pace, definitely over the speed limit. Out of nowhere, he heard a loud voice that sounded just like his father's shouting at him to slow down. He could never explain why, but he obeyed, and it's a good job that he did, because just 2 minutes later, he had to stop and change direction due to an accident. Had he not slowed down, he would have driven right into the police cars that were blocking the road, and there's a high possibility he could have died. Was the voice he heard really my great-grandfather warning him of the danger ahead? Maybe his spirit was around that particular day and had unfinished business to deal with, and saving his son's life was his salvation. Maybe he felt bad for the way he treated my grandfather when he was a boy, or maybe my grandfather just imagined it. However, this wasn't the first time my grandfather thought he heard his father's voice. It happened a couple of times before. However, after this incident, it never happened again. My grandfather did say that my great-grandfather apologized to him just before he passed on, which is comforting for both of us. My grandfather always followed his gut, and it saved him a number of times, but it was an incident back in 2005 which truly highlighted how important and crucial this gift of his was to become. He was in London staying in a hotel and was due to travel on the Underground. However, for some inexplicable reason, he got a feeling in his gut that told him to stay in. And just as he did that day when his father shouted at him to slow down, he obeyed. That day was the 7th of July, the day of the London bombings. Coincidence? I don't know. I'll leave that up to you and the other listeners to decide. I've had similar experiences myself when I was younger. This would have been before I was involved in the car accident mentioned in my previous listener stories submissions. I was walking home from school and had my earphones in, and as we all know, I didn't learn my lesson. Even though I had my music pretty loud, I distinctly heard a voice behind me I didn't recognize shout my name. Nothing happened, so it wasn't as if I was being warned by some unseen force, but it still creeped me out because there was no one else on the street I was walking down, and no cars drove past either. I'd love to know what you think this could have been. In the last batch of stories I sent to you, I mentioned my grandfather seeing a bright light when he was seriously ill that he thought was an angel. Well, he used to know a man. I can't remember what he said the connection between him and this man was, but at the time, the man, I'll call him Jim for the sake of this short story, had 3 types of cancer at the same time, and all 3 were sadly terminal. Apologies, but I can't remember the types of cancer which he was suffering from, but at the time of this experience he was stable and wasn't staying in hospital. Anyway, one day he was sat in his car and saw a bright light that kept getting brighter until it was blinding. It then disappeared very quickly, as if it just popped out of existence. Jim had an appointment at the hospital the next day, and when he had his scan, the doctors were amazed because all 3 types of cancer had gone. Was he saved by his guardian angel? I don't know. I'm just retelling the story as it was told to me, although I do understand that it sounds unbelievable. But isn't that the case with most of the stories that get told on this podcast? Unbelievable? Yes. But false? Not necessarily. There are definitely things out there that we cannot comprehend. Kind regards, Anonymous. We now move on to a number of stories sent in by a listener whose girlfriend's mother's house seems to be the epicenter for a disturbing amount of paranormal activity. All names within these stories have been changed at the request of the listener. I love the podcast. I've listened to every single episode, and I'd like to begin this by saying a huge thank you for keeping me up at night and for making me shit my pants at work. All of the events that you're about to read have taken place and have been witnessed at my girlfriend's mum's house by multiple people. I hope that you and the listeners find the content interesting. First sighting: the girl or entity. The first encounter occurred in the hallway, where a mist-like shadow formed. The shape appeared to be that of a young girl, around 6 to 8 years old, standing at about 4 foot 3 inches tall. There were no facial features, just dark voids where her eyes and mouth should have been. The mist had the distinct curvature of a child's form, but it was hard to make out more details. The hallway was dark, and there were no nearby lights, which made it impossible for it to be a shadow. The feeling in that back room was strange, like something was watching you. The entity lingered for about only 6 seconds and didn't acknowledge me at all. Second happening: the entity responds. Later, while discussing what I'd seen, I learned that Mike, Harvey, and June's exes had also experienced the same entity, the young girl. During this conversation, Rose began mocking the entity, and almost immediately afterwards, she was subjected to what she said was a loud scream right in her ear, as though it was responding to her. Third event: the letter incident. After naming the entity Judith, a few days later, an elderly woman appeared at the door with her dog, asking for a letter addressed to Judith Bethingham. This was an odd coincidence, considering the entity was only recently named, and we had no knowledge of a Judith living in the area. Could this woman have had some sort of connection to the girl? Fourth happening: the keys incident. While sitting in the kitchen, the keys on the rack suddenly flew off and landed to the right of where they had been placed. The movement was sudden, and there was no explanation for it whatsoever. Fifth happening: the Alexa incident. One evening I turned on Alexa to play some music. Suddenly the Alexa device flew across the room, about a meter from the surface it had been resting on. It was as though something unseen had thrown it. Sixth happening: the footsteps. Rose, June, and Teresa were out of the house when we heard light footsteps in the hallway. Beth and I were alone at the time, though I'm not sure if Beth actually heard them. The footsteps were clear, like someone was walking around when no one else was there. Friday the 27th of September. EMF reading. During an EMF investigation, the meter went straight to red when we asked the spirit to come forward. At this point, Teresa, only 2 years old, pointed and said, "Look, there's a monster." But there was nothing in the room to explain it. 6th of October. Cold breeze and footsteps. On Sunday the 6th of October, Beth and I were standing in the hallway when we both felt a cold breeze sweep through. Almost immediately after, we heard footsteps behind us, ascending the stairs. At the time, Teresa, June and Rose were in the living room and the dog was locked in the back room, yet the dog was laying down near the gate, clearly not hearing or reacting to the noise we heard. 6th of October, another entity sighting. That same day, I caught a glimpse of the entity again, this time out of the corner of my eye. It appeared exactly like before, except this time I noticed a black belt around its waist, which I hadn't seen in previous sightings. Thank you for taking your time to read this, and keep up the great work. Kind regards, P.L. Hudson. Our next collection of stories come from Sheila White. As with a number of listeners, she submitted a number of experiences to earlier Listener Stories episodes, and she returns with a number of very intriguing tales, especially from when she worked in the care sector. But we'll begin with a strange experience which Sheila had when she was a young girl, regarding a nightmare about a disembodied hand. Hi there. A story which I'd heard on a previous episode made me relive an event which happened to me when I was around 6 or 7 years of age. At the time, I lived with my nan and mum as my parents had divorced when I was around 3 or 4. I always went to bed at around 7:30 every night, but during one particular evening, I woke up from a nightmare, terrified. As a child, I didn't know what nightmares were, so I believed that everything contained within one was real. This nightmare dealt with a disembodied hand, like thing from the Addams Family movies, but on a much bigger scale. For some reason it was called Daisy, so I simply kept the name, and from then on it was known as Daisy the Hand. In this nightmare, Daisy the Hand would be chasing me, my mum and Nan out of the house, but my Nan would be stuck upstairs and not able to get down, so I had to try and get past this hand to save my Nan, which I did. I always believed that Daisy the Hand lived under my bed, so every night my Nan or Mum, depending upon who put me to bed that night, would have to check my bed to make sure there was nothing under there. I never had the nightmare again, but always felt like something was with me or in my subconscious. Then about 3 or 4 years later, I was spending the weekend with my dad when I had the sensation that something was in my bedroom with me. I heard scratching, but it was like fingernails scratching against something hard, and my instinct went straight to my dream again. This may not be an interesting story for some, but I thought I would share it with you anyway, just in case any other listeners out there had similar experiences with their nightmares. So, as promised, I'm going to continue with a couple of other stories from when I used to work within the healthcare sector. I worked for a home care company and went to people's homes to assist them with various things from personal care to meal preps to support calls. There was a lady I used to attend to, but disliked her house from the very moment I stepped foot into it. This house was huge. I'm guessing it had at least 6 or 7 bedrooms, plus a basement, yet she was the only person who lived in it. Whenever I was there, I would get the feeling that I was being watched. Regardless of this feeling, I always did my job then left. The garden was huge too, and as I left the house one day, something made me look back. Not sure what it was or why I looked, but I honestly thought I'd seen something. On another occasion, I had to go to a building which was similar to sheltered accommodation, but for people over 55 years of age. I had to go to 2 different floors to visit the 4 people I needed to see and assist. This building had a lift, which was quite noisy, but didn't really give off any bad vibes. I dealt with the first person on my list and then went down to 2 of the others who lived on the ground floor. I always got a gut feeling that something wasn't normal in that place. I'd completed my tasks with these 2 residents and made my way back to the lift to go back up. The lift had a shiny shimmer on the doors, and you could see your own shadow or reflection in them as you approached. This one day I pressed for the lift and leant against the wall thinking about the remaining calls I had before I could go home, as it was a half day for me. Then, I saw something from the corner of my eye, but when I looked to focus on it, there was nothing there. I figured it must have been a shadow from a bird by the window, so I didn't think too much about it at the time. I got in the lift and forgot all about it. Now, I know from colleagues that sometimes there are people who reside in those apartments who do unfortunately pass away, so keep this in mind. A couple of days later, I was back outside of the lift, waiting for it to arrive, when the same thing happened. Something caught my eye once again. Now, on that particular day, I'd had a bit of an issue with one of the residents, but they were fine. The situation called for me to request an ambulance, but everything turned out okay. As I got into the lift, I saw what seemed to be a figure walking from right to left. They looked at me and nodded, then carried on. I thought it was the person who I'd had to call an ambulance for, but that person's apartment wasn't on this floor. It was a couple of floors above. I found out later that day, unfortunately, a resident had passed away. I received a call from the office to notify me that the resident's daughter, who came to help me when I needed to ring for an ambulance, had called and complimented me on how professional I was. Was it the figure of the person saying thank you? Or were they saying I'm at peace and it's all okay? Every time I went into that building, I would pass by the apartment which that resident had lived in, and I would nod to the flat as a gesture of respect to them. Another story happened to a friend of mine. Now, I will put a bit of a warning here that what you're about to hear may sound insensitive, but it's not meant to be, and you'll see this when it's in the correct context. I did a health and social care cadet course and had to do a set amount of experience hours over 2 years. This would get me my BTEC qualifications, which, if I wanted to, would help me to go on to university. I was on a Department of Medicine for the Elderly Ward, or DME for short, and I was with another cadet who was at the top end of the ward, whilst I was at the bottom. Another cadet also got sent to us to collect some things for a different ward. The following week, we asked one of the nurses if a particular patient had been discharged, but they said unfortunately not, as they'd passed away that weekend. We were shocked because we felt they were doing so well, but we didn't ask any more questions. 2 weeks passed and again the same cadet was collecting more items, but for a different ward. The following day, that same cadet became concerned because another patient wasn't on the ward any longer and asked again if that person had been discharged, but no, they had also passed away. On our college course, we were allowed to discuss things that happened on placement but couldn't break confidentiality, and we found out that the cadet who had been collecting items for various wards had been taken off that particular duty and placed on something else. When my friend and I finally got to speak to the other cadet, she said that she felt she'd jinxed every ward she'd worked on, also telling us that she was no longer allowed on the wards anymore, and started to chuckle. We looked at her and felt quite concerned. We asked what she meant, and she explained that every time she went onto a ward, someone passed away. This brought up a couple of questions for me. Firstly, was there something attached to her? Or secondly, did she have a sixth sense? Who knows? But it's definitely food for thought. We now join Sam, whose story in episode 60, part 3, The Thing and Other Listener Stories, became the lead title. He returns once more with another story which will challenge your minds into thinking that maybe all isn't quite what we see, hear, or think. Hi Steve. I just recently heard my listener's story experience The Thing on your podcast. Very excited to see it there. Thank you for sharing it. I loved the image and the sound effects. Listening back to someone else telling it made me realize what a truly awful and terrifying experience it was. I had another equally baffling but not anywhere near as frightening experience whilst living in Melbourne on my overseas exchange that you and your listeners may find interesting and relatable, or just fascinating all the same. It's not strictly ghost or paranormal, but does deal with the theory that our consciousness is separate from our physical bodies, and raises questions as to what time is and how we perceive it. I've heard some very intriguing accounts on your podcast and other sources regarding time slips, and my experience gives this little understood subject a lot of weight. This experience occurred 1.5 to 2 years before my night attack experience. As with that experience, this incident also remains to this day incredibly fresh and vivid in my mind. As I mentioned, I was living in Melbourne and had been working at a small cafe in the inner city for around 6 months. Every day, I would take the tram to and from my flat in St Kilda to work. One night, whilst working at the cafe, I had an incredibly vivid dream or experience. I'm not sure which it was. In this dream, I was standing on a tram, holding onto the hand strap with my right hand, facing the front of the tram. I looked down at my feet and saw that I was wearing what looked like a shiny, plain pink dress, about knee length, with my jeans underneath and my shoes. More on this detail later. I then looked to my left, where I saw my co-worker Kate running for the tram, her arm raised trying to flag it down. I noticed she was wearing her work uniform, a distinctive pink one-piece dress. Then the dream ended. It was so incredibly vivid. I can still see every detail of it, even though this occurred well over 30 years ago. Thinking no more of it, other than perhaps I had consumed too much cheese that night, and feeling slightly strange, I duly went to work at the cafe. When I arrived, the owner ushered me into the back kitchen and said that she got new aprons for everybody. She held the apron up, which was a shiny plastic pink material, which matched the pink decor of the cafe. I put it on and looked down, and saw exactly what I'd seen in my dream: a pink-looking dress, my blue jeans and shoes. I was slightly freaked out about this, but put it down to what could only be premonition-type psychic experience. Then things got a little weirder. Kate arrived at work. She always arrived about an hour after me, and she always, without exception, would wear her civilian clothes, then get changed into her work uniform. On this morning, Kate arrived a bit late in her pink work dress, looking somewhat frazzled. When I inquired as to how she was, she replied that her alarm had not gone off, so she woke up in a panic, then threw her work uniform on and had to run frantically for the tram. This is exactly what I had witnessed in my dream, except I was on the tram that she was running for, and I was wearing my new apron, which I hadn't even seen yet. I was flummoxed. I remember my mind spinning as I tried to make sense of my dream. Being very interested in all things paranormal since I was a young lad, I was well aware of premonitions and psychic dreams and such. So, on one hand, I understood on a cognitive level what I'd experienced, but on the other hand, having actually experienced it firsthand, that was something else. It was suddenly very real. This experience made me question several things specifically. How far in advance are events and experiences in our lives set in stone? How was my consciousness able to somehow leap forward and witness events that hadn't yet occurred? Are our lives mapped out like this? Is everything fate? Or are events in our lives mapped out to a certain point, and then after that, we have infinite possibilities ahead based on the choices we make in the moment? Do we even have free will? This experience still makes my brain hurt when I try to figure it out. I just can't understand the mechanics of it. But it was fascinating nonetheless, and I hope that by sharing it with yourself, listeners can relate to it and not feel that they're alone or crazy, or it can get people's minds even more curious about the mysteries of this incredible universe that we still know so little about. Thanks, Steve. Keep up the great work. Best wishes, Sam. We've now made it to the last story of this episode, a story sent in by Robert Ensor. What you're about to hear is a fascinating deep dive into the phenomena which plagued one man, and his fight to not only understand what he felt it was, but also the methods and strategies which he used to combat it, So get ready, get comfortable, dim those lights and settle down as we hear about the ghost within. I like the format of your podcast and want to share my personal experiences with you and your audience. I suppose the experiences would fall into the poltergeist category. What makes my story unusual and worth sharing is that I have quite an unusual take on the paranormal, got rid of the activity completely, and understand exactly how I did it. The story includes a possible sleep paralysis experience that you may also be interested in. I would be willing to put my name to the story if that helps. Please see my full story below. The events mostly took place in the UK, and I am British. For the purposes of this account, by activity, phenomena, and paranormal activity, I mean the strange noises, movements, feelings, sights, and smells inexplicable by mainstream science that are traditionally attributed to ghosts and poltergeists, but are actually unintentionally caused by the mind. So I call it mind-matter activity, because that is a more accurate, descriptive term than poltergeist, German for noisy ghost, which implies the presence of a malicious spirit external to the affected person. Mind-matter activity can be turned into the acronym MMA, not to be confused with mixed martial arts. I'm no cage fighter. I know there is an afterlife, but souls of the dead don't hang around here to cause mischief. They have better things to do and go to a different dimension to further their spiritual development. This view was first outlined by the mother of modern esotericism, Madame Blavatsky, who blamed hauntings on elementals, an occult term for emotions. My approach can be seen as a modification and clarification of the theory she used to control so-called spirits at seances. At least 2/3 of Americans have had a paranormal experience, according to various polls, which reveal that the paranormal is actually quite normal. People are just too afraid of ridicule to talk about it in our materialistic society. Indeed, paranormal phenomena are merely weird manifestations of the normal law of mind creating matter, for which there is plenty of evidence, not least the tendency to encounter similar scenarios and people repeatedly, in ways that go beyond what is normally considered to be one's control. There is also verified evidence from near-death experiences that the soul can exist independently from the body, as well as copious scientific and anecdotal evidence from people who have healed various symptoms and diseases through changing their mindset. The mind-over-matter theory explains the observer effects in physics, whereby the mere act of observing changes the outcome of experiments on the quantum level. It also dovetails nicely with stories of reincarnation containing verified historical details from past lives, and the very strong scientific evidence for extrasensory perception, the ability to perceive what is going on at a distance using the power of the mind alone. More obviously, we blush when embarrassed, and in the absence of disability, limbs respond to mental commands. Adopting this worldview has been very helpful to me in a number of ways, and it was vital to solving my paranormal problem. I experienced a bit of activity in my old house that went away after a while. I remained untroubled by ghosts for many years, largely because my attention was focused on progressively worsening psychosomatic symptoms instead: back pain, gingivitis, chronic fatigue, and digestive problems, among other complaints. The paranormal activity did not become really significant and prolonged until after I recovered from my illness and found God through the gospel and spiritual rebirth. At that point, I started hearing and feeling a strange rattling on and inside my pillow. I checked for spiders or anything else that could be causing it and found nothing. This escalated to hearing ghostly scuttling around the walls of my room at night. Nightmares feeling invisible spiders crawling over my face, body, and bed sheets. Unexplained sulfur smells, sudden chills, inexplicable indoor puddles of water. No, I did not wet myself. And even a clear paranormal movement of an object. A tissue was pulled out of the box for me when I was lying in bed. Most of these phenomena occurred in my bedroom at night, but increasingly, I had minor experiences out and about in daytime, such as some faint crawling and shuffling sensations on my head and face. I tried on all the normal explanations: creaking old house, wind, sleep paralysis, hypnagogia, etc., but none of them fitted with most of what I experienced. I was left to conclude that I had a poltergeist. Believing that ghosts or unwanted spirits were the cause of the problem, and watching ghost-related media made me afraid, and that fear made it much worse. To clarify, I am not blaming the TV shows I watched for causing the activity. It was the false beliefs and fear born of my interpretation of what I had seen that was the problem, not the programs themselves. Nightmares about ghosts also exasperated the issue because they increased my anxiety level and suggested that unwanted spirits were in my room. In one nightmare, I dreamed I was being choked by something and struggled to move or speak. Then I woke up. This may have been an instance of sleep paralysis. I began to research the paranormal in an effort to understand, once and for all, what is really behind these phenomena which have baffled investigators for centuries. I looked at many famous cases and encountered the work of parapsychologists and occult experts like Blavatsky, the Swiss psychologist Carl Jung, Dr. Nandor Fodor, Colin Wilson, and Guy Lyon Playfair. Fear, stress, expectations, and very specific locations believed to be haunted seemed to be correlated with worsening activity in the cases I observed. The idea that poltergeists were caused by the unconscious minds of certain disturbed people kept cropping up, but never in a practical way I could actually use to solve the problem. Out of desperation, I tried sealing my aura, crystals, putting on clean bed sheets more frequently than normal, all of which are recommended in certain spiritual circles as anti-poltergeist methods. These measures yielded a temporary placebo effect that worked via the power of belief but didn't last, because the root cause, the misunderstanding, remained unaddressed. I started getting activity at night whenever I read the Bible or wrote about spirituality in the daytime. This was tough because I was writing my book, The Spirit Solution: Lessons Learned from My Spiritual Journey at the time. I got angry and became determined to stop at nothing to end the activity because it was messing with my sleep and my work. So I prayed to Christ. Show me how to get rid of the phenomena and I will tell others how I did it. The next day I talked to my mum about the problem. I aired the theory that the paranormal activity I was experiencing was essentially the same as the psychosomatic symptoms I had recovered from previously. Whereas I was only 90% sure, my mum was absolutely adamant that the activity was mentally generated and functioned the same way as my former symptoms, which were healed completely thanks to Christ and the work of Dr. John Sarno on the mind-body syndrome, his term for psychosomatic symptoms. That hypothesis certainly explained why the mind-matter activity resumed and intensified after my physical symptoms were cured. The two problems were interchangeable, different effects of the same basic causes. The mind-body techniques I applied to my physical symptoms were also able to resolve the unexplained noises, feelings, smells, and movements. Paranormal phenomena are caused by false beliefs that ghosts and evil spirits create them, and the concomitant fear. I learned this by clearly observing that nocebo information that led me to believe in troublesome ghosts and spirits, expecting the activity to get worse and worrying about it, were all strongly associated with an exasperation of the phenomena. I believed in an afterlife for some years before the main episode, but the activity really kicked off when I learned, beyond any doubt, that there definitely is an afterlife. You can't fear something you don't believe in, otherwise it's just dismissed as absurd nonsense, like the bogeyman. Therefore, beliefs are primary. But the cause of the false beliefs and fear is the deceiver. The deceiver is a part of the mind everyone has that wants to mess us up, and it does so mainly through fear, wrong beliefs, false associations, and symptoms. What typically happens in a haunting is someone will say a house is haunted, or someone died there, or some tragedy occurred in that location. Then it is internalized or half-believed by the affected person, and that belief creates fear. Added to this is the tendency of people to think that old houses are more likely to be haunted and to be more afraid at night due to the uncertainty of darkness. The deceiver takes that as license to generate some activity, typically after dark, using the belief and the fear as emotional energy for paranormal manifestations. The more activity is experienced, the stronger the belief in and fear of evil spirits becomes, which in turn exasperates the phenomena in a vicious feedback loop. An association is thereby forged between a specific time and place and paranormal activity that is nothing more than a conditioned response inspired by nocebo triggers and cultural representations of ghosts. Sometimes there is no nocebo trigger, and in the absence of a proper understanding, the deceiver just goes fishing, creating mind-matter activity out of the blue, and hopes that you will take the bait by believing the activity is a poltergeist or ghost and worrying about it, thereby giving it permission to continue. The deceiver cannot do anything if you don't believe it. It needs that belief as fuel. The key for me was to recognize the deceiver at work, refute its arguments, and then, when I understood what was going on, to ignore it. It's much easier to not believe someone if you are able to ignore them and they're not in your face 24/7. It's the same with the deceiver, which is an archetype, an innate inner personality. The solution was firstly to understand that the activity was not caused by ghosts or poltergeists, but was generated by the mind. This was a lot less scary and more accurate than thinking the soul of some dead person was there with me, because one's mind is perceived as more controllable than an independent soul or entity. So I asked myself the following questions. Did you watch a ghost hunting show before the activity started? Does fear make it worse? Was believing in ghosts, malicious spirits, or an afterlife correlated with the onset of exasperation of the issue? Does stress seem to make it worse? When you believe that some ritual will help, does it? When you believe the phenomena will worsen, do they? For me, the answer to all of the above was yes. These were all signs that it was mind-matter activity, a kind of TMS manifestation outside the body. I had to compile a list of evidence supporting that theory in order to prove to myself what was going on. I was quickly convinced. The theory explained not only everything I had experienced, it explained everything that I had encountered in the course of my paranormal research and viewing. Even mediums who had identified historical facts about haunted areas that were not available to them by normal means, and paranormal activity corresponding to those previously unknown events, were explicable via the deceiver's faculty of extrasensory perception, which it shares with the mind in general. That new understanding lowered the fear level and demolished the false beliefs that ghosts or poltergeists were behind the activity. Then all I had to do was resolve and believe that I was definitely going to get rid of the phenomena. This was easier to do when I knew I had that power. If a problem is started by the mind can end it. Praying to God isn't strictly necessary to get rid of MMA, but it certainly helped me a great deal when I asked with true resolve and faith. Ultimately, I owe my solution to Christ. Most people afflicted with mind-matter activity consciously want to get rid of it, but many unconsciously want a paranormal experience for various reasons. The main one is a need to understand the profundity of the mind-matter connection to progress to the next level of spiritual insight and development. Learning that lesson fulfilled the deepest underlying purpose of my MMA, which was partly educative. To fully resolve the activity, it was also necessary for me to show I was no longer afraid of it and did not believe it would continue, or that it was caused by evil spirits by ceasing all unnecessary interventions and resuming normal activities. This included ditching all the superstitious rituals like cleanliness aimed at expelling elementals, although normal hygiene is good, oral sealing, crystals, avoiding certain rooms or areas, and even repeatedly reading through my self-compiled list of evidence for a mind-matter causation once that information was fully assimilated. All of these behaviors had to stop because they were all driven by the fear and wrong beliefs that created the problem. Whenever I believed I needed to do something to keep the activity at bay, if I didn't do that, it usually got worse. Therefore, placebo rituals are double-edged swords, and it all comes down to the beliefs. The MMA took a slightly different form once I started making progress. After I watched a ritual that invoked demons on a ghost hunting show, it got worse. Part of me thought that maybe the ritual on the show had stirred up some demonic entity in my home, although another part of me knew that idea was nonsensical. Then I prayed to Christ again and fully realized it was all the same thing. The new activity was functioning like a kind of symptom imperative, the phenomena identified by Dr. Sarno, whereby as the original mind-body symptom dissipates, another one can sometimes take its place in a different location or bodily system. So I addressed the fear of demons in the same way I tackled the original problem, by realizing there was no demon in the sense that people normally use that word, just as there was no ghost, that it was all caused by my fear, and it went away. I got rid of the activity completely, which is surely the best evidence for the theory that was revealed to me by God in perfect and swift answer to my prayer. I didn't need to be 100% free of fear to solve MMA. I just had to believe it would go away, act accordingly, and not let the deceiver change my mind. What makes my paranormal story unusual is that I got rid of the problem and understand exactly how I did it. That's one reason why it has to be shared. I also promised Christ I would tell the story when the activity went away. If you are interested in learning more, Robert's book, The Ghost Within, my experience of paranormal activity and my steps to get rid of ghosts, hauntings, and poltergeists by understanding what they really are, is available now on Amazon. And with that, we come to the end of this second helping of fantastic listener stories. As always, we'd like to thank each and every single one of you who have sent in your stories. I'm sure that everyone listening will agree that all of the content featured in this episode was not only interesting, but also entertaining, and quite frightening. So until we dive headfirst into part 3 of our end of season extravaganza, all that is left for me to say is, until the next time, stay safe and take care.